The warehouse ceiling was 20 feet of rusted steel and silence. Elena stood in the center, the concrete floor vibrating with the hum of a distant transformer. She held a stack of invoices in one hand and a single, outdated laptop in the other. Her bank account balance, displayed in glowing green digits on the screen, read exactly $12. The air in the room was stagnant, smelling of dust and wet insulation. She did not look up at the shadows in the rafters or pace the floor. She set the laptop down on a wooden crate and opened the lid. The screen light illuminated her face, sharp and steady. She typed the contact information for a local logistics firm, her fingers moving with precise, rhythmic pressure. She checked the address, verified the recipient, and clicked send on a proposal offering to manage their supply chain inefficiencies for a flat commission. The silence returned as the cursor blinked, waiting for a response that had not yet arrived. She closed the laptop, took a breath, and prepared to wait. The first reply arrived at 9 in the morning, a short, automated decline. Elena did not blink. She refreshed the inbox, watching the spinning icon on the screen until the next notification popped up. It was the second firm. A firm no attached to a standard template. She deleted the thread, cleared the cache, and adjusted the font size on her proposal. The third response came at 11:40. It was a formal rejection, citing lack of experience. She leaned back, the wooden crate groaning under her weight, and looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked in jagged, uneven bursts. She did not sigh. She did not reach for water or pace to burn off frustration. She simply opened a new tab, searched for the next logistics firm in the district, and began drafting a fresh cover letter. The warehouse remained silent, but the laptop fan whirred as it processed the data. By noon, she had 3 rejections and 1 clear path forward. She stood up, tucked the device under her arm, and walked toward the heavy steel door. Her pace was measured, steady, and entirely devoid of doubt. The street outside the warehouse was slick with midday rain. Elena stepped onto the pavement, the heavy steel door clanging shut behind her. She checked the time on her phone, then looked at the address of the 4th company, located 3 miles across the industrial district. She did not hail a taxi. She did not seek shelter. She stepped into the flow of traffic, her stride long and rhythmic. The city around her was a blur of grinding engines and shouting workers, but she moved with a singular line of sight. She navigated the cracked sidewalks, dodging puddles and avoiding the crowds. She did not stop for coffee or to rest her feet. Her focus was entirely on the physical distance closing between her and the target. She crossed the bridge, the wind whipping at her, and pressed onward until the glass and steel facade of the logistics firm rose above the surrounding warehouses. She walked straight to the entrance, pushed through the revolving doors, and stepped into the lobby. The air inside was climate-controlled and sterile. She did not hesitate at the front desk. She walked toward the center of the room, found a chair, and sat down. She was exactly where she needed to be. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and cold, recycled air. Elena sat in a chair near the elevators, her back straight, her focus fixed on the frosted glass office at the end of the corridor. The receptionist did not look up. A security guard paced the perimeter twice, his eyes sliding over her as if she were part of the furniture. 1 hour passed. The sun shifted across the floor, casting long, sharp shadows that crept toward her feet. She did not reach for her phone or check the time. A courier arrived, dropped a stack of documents, and left, the heavy thud of the door echoing in the silence. 2 hours. Her legs felt heavy, but she did not shift her weight. She kept her hands folded over the notebook on her lap, her grip firm. 3 hours. The office staff began to filter out, their heels clicking against the stone, their chatter fading into the distance. They ignored her presence entirely, walking past her as if she were invisible. She did not flinch, did not sigh, and did not look away. She stared at the closed door of the manager's office, counting the rhythmic pulses of the ventilation system. 4 hours. She was the only person left in the room. The heavy oak door creaked open. A man stepped out, his gaze fixed on a folder in his hand, his pace brisk and dismissive. He did not see her until he reached the elevator bank. Elena stood. She did not speak. She crossed the remaining 10 feet of marble floor in 3 measured strides, effectively cutting off his path to the exit. The manager stopped, his eyebrows arching in a silent demand for an explanation. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out the spreadsheet. She did not offer a pitch, a greeting, or an apology for the intrusion. She stepped forward and placed the document directly onto the center of his desk, which he had left cluttered with loose files. The paper landed with a sharp, crisp sound that echoed against the high ceilings. She tapped the column highlighting the fuel consumption spikes. The manager looked at the paper, then he looked at her. He scanned the rows of data, his eyes narrowing as he traced the numbers with a finger. The air in the office went still. The low hum of the building seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of his measured breathing. He did not look up. He did not dismiss her. He stared at the evidence of his own company's waste. The manager gestured toward a leather chair across from his desk. Elena sat, her hands resting on her knees, waiting. He did not speak immediately, instead flipping through the pages of the spreadsheet, his eyes darting between the fuel consumption graphs and the projected savings columns. He leaned back, the leather creaking under his weight, and studied her with a new, narrowed focus. He asked for her terms. Elena kept her voice steady, outlining a flat commission based strictly on the efficiency gains she promised to deliver. The manager tapped his pen against the desk, a rhythmic sound that filled the small office. He countered with a lower percentage. Elena shook her head once, refusing to concede the value of her labor. They went back and forth for 10 minutes, the tension in the room shifting from confrontation to calculation. Finally, the manager grabbed a fountain pen and pulled a standard service agreement from his drawer. He scrawled his signature across the bottom and pushed the document toward her. Elena marked the paper, her movements precise and calm. She stood, took her copy, and turned toward the door. The $12 in her bank account had not changed, but the trajectory of her life had shifted. She walked out of the office, the weight of the contract in her hand, leaving the silence of the warehouse behind for the reality of her first business operation. 6 months later, the warehouse was a memory. Elena moved her operation to a rented office, a space cramped with 5 desks and the constant, jagged hum of a growing enterprise. She managed 5 employees, their voices a persistent background static of freight coordination and client disputes. She spent her daylight hours tethered to a phone and a whiteboard, mapping shipping routes that crossed the country. But the real work began when the office lights dimmed. While the others left, she remained. Her desk became a graveyard of cold coffee cups and crumpled notes. She moved between the roles of manager and engineer, her eyes burning as she stared into the glow of her monitor. She was building an algorithm to replace the manual labor of tracking, line by line, command by command. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a rhythmic, relentless cadence. Each keystroke was a gamble against time. She adjusted a variable, reran the simulation, and watched the data flow. The freight routes on her screen began to stabilize, aligning with the automated logic she was forging. She was no longer just managing shipments. She was constructing a machine that could think faster than any human in the room. The office air grew stale, but she did not notice, locked in the architecture of the code. The final migration started at midnight. Elena watched the progress bar crawl across the monitor, each percentage point representing months of labor. The office was quiet, save for the low, steady fan whir of the server rack in the corner. Then, the rhythm shifted. The fans spiked to a high-pitched scream. On the screen, the progress bar stuttered and froze. A cascade of red error messages flooded the interface, scrolling faster than she could read. She reached for the keyboard, fingers hovering, but the terminal locked. The screen went black. A moment later, the room plunged into an unnatural silence as the server rack cut out completely. Elena stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. She moved to the terminal and tapped the power key. Nothing. The main database connection for her largest client was severed. Across the office, the secondary monitors flickered and died. The link to the national shipping network was gone. Elena looked at the darkened server tower and the frozen, dead screens. Every line of code, every route, and every piece of delivery data had vanished into the hardware failure. The entire operation hit a dead stop. She checked her watch. The client expected a full status update in 3 hours, and her architecture was currently a pile of useless offline silicon. Elena did not panic. She pulled a stack of raw logs from the filing cabinet and opened a second terminal. The automated migration was dead, but the raw data existed in physical archives. she began to type. Her first hour was steady, but by the 10th, her shoulders ached and her vision blurred. She kept the pace, entering freight manifests and client coordinates one by one. She skipped meals, drinking only cold water to stay awake. By the 20th hour, the office lights flickered as the sun rose and set again. She did not leave her chair. Her fingers moved with a mechanical, numbing repetition. Every error message she corrected was a victory against the total collapse of her reputation. At the 30th hour, her eyelids grew heavy, but she splashed water on her face and returned to the desk. She entered the final batch of routing IDs, verified the parity of the databases, and hit the final command. A confirmation ping sounded from the terminal. The account was live again. She checked the client interface. The data was reconciled. She had saved the connection. Elena sat back, her hands trembling, and watched the status bar hit 100%. The 36-hour marathon ended in a quiet, empty room. By the end of the year, the software was fully integrated into the national network. The shipping conglomerate initiated the acquisition process within a week. Elena sat in the boardroom, watching the lead executive slide a document across the polished table. It was a 7-figure offer, a sum that transformed her from a struggling founder into a wealthy entrepreneur. She scanned the terms, noted the transfer schedule, and picked up a pen. She signed the contract in one fluid motion and set the pen down. There was no shaking of hands, no celebratory drink, and no pause to acknowledge the milestone. She stood up, gathered her laptop, and walked out of the building. The financial windfall moved into her account, but she did not check the balance. She treated the arrival of the funds as a simple data point, a resource to be allocated, rather than a victory to be savored. Back in her office, she cleared her desk of the project files. She did not look back at the empty space where her team had worked for months. She looked at her watch, noted the time, and turned her attention to the next file on her desk. The deal was closed. The chapter was finished. She was already calculating the cost of the next move. The 7-figure windfall sat in her account for less than an hour. Elena spent that time in her office, filtering through market reports and insolvency listings on her monitor. She ignored the balance sheet that reflected her newfound wealth. Her focus remained fixed on a single manufacturing firm currently bleeding assets and nearing total bankruptcy. The firm was a ghost of its former self, plagued by inefficient production and a crumbling management structure. Most investors saw a sinking ship. Elena saw a system waiting to be redesigned. She opened her banking application, authorized a total transfer of the entire acquisition sum, and pressed send. The funds vanished from her personal account, moving directly into the firm's rescue fund. Her bank balance dropped back to a negligible amount. She stood up, locked her office, and left the building without a second glance at the life she had just liquidated. She walked to the train station, checked the arrival times for the industrial district, and stepped onto the platform. She had no safety net, no reserves, and no comfort. She was back at the starting line. But this time, she had an entire factory to dismantle. The factory air tasted like ozone and burnt lubricant. Elena walked past the quiet lobby and pushed through the heavy steel doors into the main assembly hall. The noise was a rhythmic, grinding roar that vibrated through her boots. She did not approach the supervisors. She walked to the center of the floor, standing near the primary conveyor belt. She pulled a stopwatch from her pocket and began to track the interval between completed units. Every time the line stalled, she moved closer to the source of the friction. She watched the workers feed parts into the machines, noting where hands hesitated and where the mechanical flow broke down. Her gaze remained fixed on the gears and the movement of raw materials. She spent the first week documenting the delay in every sequence. When the machines hummed, she watched the vibration. When they failed, she stepped into the grease to inspect the jam. She tracked the flow of freight from the loading dock to the final output bins, marking every second lost to inefficient handling. The facility was a web of outdated processes and wasted motion. She memorized the sound of the line, learning to identify the exact moment of failure by pitch alone. She was no longer an outsider. She was part of the machine. Elena did not wait for an invitation to the executive floor. She marched into the weekly management meeting, a stack of performance data tucked under her arm. The lead supervisor sat at the head of the table, his coffee cup midair. He started to speak, but Elena set the files down with a sharp crack that silenced the room. She pointed to a page detailing the last 6 months of production losses. She did not ask for their input. She demanded their resignation if they refused to adopt the new workflow. The supervisor stood, his face flushing, and accused her of ruining decades of established practice. Elena did not blink. She pulled her stopwatch out, placed it on the mahogany table, and gave them 60 seconds to agree to the terms or leave the building. One by one, the older managers gathered their belongings. They moved slowly, hoping she would back down. She didn't. She watched them exit the room, then walked to the head of the table and took the lead seat. By the time the door clicked shut, the hierarchy was gone. She opened her notebook, drew a single line through the old organizational chart, and began sketching a leaner, faster system. The power dynamic had shifted in under a minute. The transformation took hold within the month. The chaotic clanking of the assembly line smoothed into a high-pitched, efficient hum. Where there were once bottlenecks, there was now a continuous, fluid movement of parts from the loading bay to the final crates. Elena walked the aisles, her hand tracking the speed of the conveyor belt as it moved faster than the previous management had ever thought possible. A sudden screech erupted near the central press. A bearing had seized under the new, higher load. The line shuddered and stopped. Workers froze, looking toward the catwalk. Elena did not yell. She vaulted the railing, dropped onto the floor, and grabbed a wrench. She worked the housing loose, cleared the jammed debris, and reset the pressure valve in under 30 seconds. She nodded to the operator. The line roared back to life, faster than before. By the end of the 4th year, the output count had reached double the original capacity. The loading docks were constantly full. Trucks arrived and departed in a tight, clockwork rotation that left no room for error. The factory was no longer a place of decay. It was a high-functioning organism of steel and motion. Elena stood on the mezzanine, watching the final tally climb on the digital monitor, and finally, she allowed herself to step back. The factory was stable, but the boardroom was a battlefield of a different kind. Elena sat alone in the glass-walled office, surrounded by stacks of legal prospectuses. Her pen moved across the final signature page, the ink dark and heavy. She checked the wall clock, 3 hours until the exchange opened. A lawyer entered, dropping a folder on her desk, claiming the auditors had found a discrepancy in the manufacturing overhead that could stall the public offering for weeks. Elena did not look up. She read the highlighted lines, her eyes scanning the figures with surgical precision. She stood, picked up the desk phone, and dialed the lead auditor directly. She spoke for 3 minutes, citing the precise internal logs she had kept since day one, leaving no room for debate or error. She hung up the phone and walked to the window. Below, the city traffic blurred into a stream of gray steel. She turned back to the desk and closed the folder. The path was clear. She adjusted her watch, gripped the edge of the mahogany desk until her knuckles turned white, and waited for the opening bell. Every asset, every hour, and every decision of the last 4 years was now tied to the ticker symbol flashing on her private terminal. She was ready. The exchange floor was a sensory assault. Thousands of voices shouted over each other, a rhythmic roar of competing bids and frantic orders. Screens overhead flashed rapidly, scrolling through lists of symbols and numbers that changed every fraction of a second. Elena stood near the edge of the central platform, her hands resting flat against the cold metal railing. She did not look at the traders. She focused entirely on the primary ticker display. The stock symbol for her company crawled across the board. For a heartbeat, the digits pulsed red, signaling a sharp, sudden dip. The noise around her spiked. Traders lunged toward their terminals, shouting numbers that signaled a sell-off. Elena remained motionless. She did not lean forward, nor did she check her own device. She watched the screen as the red digits stalled, flickered once, and then snapped to a vibrant, solid green. The upward trajectory began, slow at first, then accelerating with a steady, relentless rhythm. The panic in the surrounding crowd evaporated, replaced by a sudden, frantic scramble to buy back in. Elena exhaled a single, controlled breath. The market had accepted the value she had built. She turned her head slightly, watching the green numbers climb higher, and maintained her position in the center of the storm. The numbers on the primary screen accelerated. 500 million, 600. The crowd around the platform surged, their shouts merging into a singular low-frequency hum that vibrated through the floorboards. Elena kept her eyes locked on the digital display. The refresh rate of the monitor stuttered for a fraction of a second, freezing the digits on 799 million. For that heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then, the screen flickered. The data packets caught up, and the numbers cascaded forward again. 800, 950. The ticker scrolled past the final barrier. The digits shifted. A 1 followed by 9 zeros appeared in crisp, white text against the dark background. The milestone was marked. The valuation had hit the billion-dollar target. Elena watched the terminal register the change, her hands remaining perfectly still on the railing. The surrounding traders erupted in cheers and frantic gestures, but she did not turn to look at them. She tracked the final decimal point as it stabilized, confirming the figure held. She had reached the destination. She waited for the ticker to cycle through one final refresh, verifying the data one last time. It stayed. The peak of the mountain was here. The cheering around the platform deepened, a wall of sound that filled the vaulted space. Elena ignored it. She reached out and pressed the power button on the side of her laptop. The screen went black, cutting the connection to the live data stream instantly. She tucked the device under her arm, the metal chassis cool against her side. She turned her back to the terminal. The traders were still shouting at their screens, locked in the momentum of the market, completely unaware that the architect of their current spike was leaving. Elena stepped off the platform. Her boots clicked against the polished floor, a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the ambient roar. She navigated the narrow aisles between the desks, weaving through the crowded rows without slowing her pace. People brushed past her, eyes glued to flickering displays, their shoulders tense with the adrenaline of the trade. She did not bump into anyone. She moved through the gaps with precise, practiced efficiency. She reached the heavy glass doors of the trading floor and pushed them open. The sudden shift in air pressure pulled at her as she stepped out into the hallway. She did not look back. She walked toward the elevators, her footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet corridor. The heavy door of the taxi clicked shut, sealing out the hum of the city. Elena slid across the leather seat, the interior smelling faintly of ozone and old paper. The driver pulled into traffic, the streetlights outside blurring into long gold streaks against the dark window glass. She did not watch the skyline. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. The screen illuminated her face with a harsh white glow. She tapped the screen, navigating past the interface until the banking application icon appeared. It displayed a figure with 9 zeros, a number that had defined her existence for 4 years. She pressed her thumb against the screen, held the icon until it began to vibrate, and selected the prompt to remove the application entirely. A progress bar flashed once. The icon vanished. The screen returned to its default, empty state. She set the phone face down on the seat beside her. The car slowed for a red light, the engine idling with a low, steady vibration. She leaned her head back against the cushion, looking at the ceiling of the cab. Outside, the city continued its motion, but she remained motionless, her hands resting flat on her knees. The terminal was clear. The account was gone. The board was reset. The taxi turned a sharp corner, the tires humming against the asphalt. Elena shifted her weight and reached back into her bag, pulling out a fresh, blank notebook. The cover was stiff, textured, and entirely unmarked. She opened it to the first page, the sound of the binding crackling in the quiet cabin. She reached further into the bag and withdrew a fountain pen. She unscrewed the cap, the metal threads clicking softly as they parted. She tested the nib against the corner of the paper, watching a thin, dark line of ink appear. She did not hesitate. She placed the pen against the center of the page and began to map out a new logistic structure. Her hand moved with steady, practiced rhythm, drawing arrows and connecting columns of theoretical data. The driver navigated the late-night streets, but she did not look at the passing lights. She focused entirely on the white space in front of her. She adjusted the tilt of the notebook, smoothed the corner with her thumb, and continued writing. The ink flowed, forming the foundation of a new system. She turned the page, the sound sharp in the still air, and kept working. The sequence was set. The cycle had begun again.